I'm Emily Hart, 29, and I've spent my entire life feeling like a guest at my own family gatherings. This Christmas was supposed to be different. I'd finally created something extraordinary, a handcrafted coffee table that took me 3 months to perfect. Every curve and joint infused with love and skill. But as I sat in my childhood bedroom the night before Christmas Eve, carefully wrapping my masterpiece in brown paper and twine, I couldn't shake the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Would this finally be enough to make them see me? Growing up as the middle child in the Hart family meant living in permanent twilight between my siblings' blazing achievements. My older sister Claire, now 33, had always been the golden child. She sailed through law school at Yale, landed a prestigious position at a top firm in Manhattan, and married another successful attorney. Everything Claire touched turned to gold, and our parents never tired of broadcasting her accomplishments to anyone with an earshot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then there was my younger brother Ethan, 26, who possessed an effortless charm that made everyone forgive his lack of direction. While Claire conquered the legal world, Ethan floated through life on good looks and personality, taking jobs he'd abandoned within months, dating a string of women who adored his carefree spirit. Our mother, Margaret, defended his wandering ways as finding himself, a luxury I'd never been afforded. And then there was me, Emily, stuck in the middle. Not brilliant enough to compete with Claire's achievements, not charismatic enough to match Ethan's natural magnetism. I was the practical one, the reliable one, the one who helped plan family gatherings and remembered everyone's birthdays, but whose own accomplishments seemed to fade into background noise. I'd pursued art and design despite my family's gentle but persistent disapproval. Art is a lovely hobby, dear, my mother would say, but you need something stable to fall back on. When I'd managed to build a thriving custom furniture business, creating one-of-a-kind pieces for discerning clients, my family still spoke of it as if I were playing with toys in my garage. The Christmas gift tradition in our family had always highlighted the hierarchy. Claire received thoughtful, expensive presents that acknowledged her success. Designer briefcases, first-class weekend getaways, jewelry from Tiffany. Ethan got indulgent gifts that catered to his latest interests. Top-of-the-line ski equipment one year, a motorcycle the next. My gifts were practical and forgettable. Kitchen appliances, gift cards, items chosen without much thought or consideration for who I actually was. This year, I decided to change the dynamic. Instead of waiting for recognition, I would give something so beautiful, so clearly crafted with love and skill that my family would have to acknowledge my talent. The coffee table I created was a masterpiece of walnut and cherry wood with hand-carved details that showcased techniques I'd spent years perfecting. Every grain flowed like water, the joints were seamless, and the finish gleamed with a depth that only came from patience and expertise. Several clients had offered to commission similar pieces after seeing my sketches, but this one was for Mom. This one was my olive branch, my proof of worth, my plea for recognition, all wrapped into one stunning creation. As I finished wrapping the table, I imagined the moment of unveiling. Maybe, for once, I would be the one who received genuine admiration. Maybe my mother would finally understand that my chosen path wasn't a consolation prize, but a calling that had led to real success and artistry. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, perfect Christmas Eve weather. I loaded the wrapped table carefully into my SUV, my heart racing with nervous anticipation. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs felt both too long and too short, my mind cycling through scenarios of how the gift-giving might unfold. Their house, a stately colonial where I'd grown up, was already bustling with activity when I arrived. Claire's BMW sat in the driveway next to Ethan's latest impulse purchase, a bright red Jeep Wrangler. Through the windows, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights and the familiar chaos of family preparation. My father, Daniel, greeted me at the door with his usual gentle smile and awkward hug. He'd always been kind, but passive, content to let my mother orchestrate family dynamics while he retreated to his study or workshop. Emily, sweetheart, Merry Christmas. Let me help you with that. He gestured toward the large wrapped package I was carefully maneuvering from my car. It's okay, Dad. I've got it. It's, fragile. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine, triggering a flood of childhood memories. My mother appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her hands, looking every inch the perfect hostess she'd always prided herself on being. Emily, dear, you're early. Good. Claire and Michael won't be here for another hour, and Ethan is still sleeping off whatever he did last night. She glanced at my package with mild curiosity, but no real interest. Just put whatever that is under the tree with the others. I carefully placed my masterpiece among the other gifts, noting the elegant wrapping and expensive-looking boxes that surrounded it. My brown paper and twine suddenly seemed rustic and out of place, but I reminded myself that what mattered was what lay beneath the wrapping. The rest of Christmas Eve unfolded with familiar patterns. Claire arrived with her husband Michael and an armload of beautifully wrapped gifts, immediately commanding attention with stories of their latest vacation to Tuscany and her recent promotion to senior partner. Ethan eventually surfaced, charming everyone with self-deprecating jokes about his latest job mishap, somehow making his failures seem endearing rather than concerning. I found myself slipping into my usual role, helping in the kitchen, keeping conversations flowing, making sure everyone's drinks were filled. It was easier than trying to compete for attention, safer than risking the disappointment of being overlooked once again. That evening, as we gathered around the tree for our traditional Christmas Eve gift exchange, I felt the familiar butterflies in my stomach intensify. This was my moment. This was when everything would change. But as the evening progressed and gifts were opened and admired, my carefully wrapped table remained untouched. Claire's presents were received with gasps of delight and lengthy appreciation. Ethan's quirky gifts prompted laughter and warm hugs. My contribution sat silently in the corner, seemingly invisible to everyone except me. "We'll save some for tomorrow," my mother announced, as the pile dwindled, though several less significant gifts remained unopened alongside mine. The message was clear without being stated. Some gifts mattered more than others, and mine wasn't among the priority items. I swallowed my disappointment and smiled, helping clean up wrapping paper and organizing the open gifts. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow would be different. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of crystalline winter sunlight that made everything look possible. I'd slept fitfully in my childhood bedroom, my mind cycling between anticipation and the familiar dread that had characterized every family gathering for as long as I could remember. Today had to be different. Today, my mother would unwrap my gift and finally see me, really see me. The Hart family Christmas morning ritual was as choreographed as a ballet. My mother would prepare her famous Christmas breakfast casserole, while the rest of us nursed coffee and tried to contain our excitement for the main gift exchange. This year felt different, as I helped set the table, stealing glances at my wrapped table, still sitting under the tree, more noticeable now that the Christmas Eve presents had been cleared away. Claire and Michael had stayed overnight in the guest room, and I could hear them moving around upstairs, probably coordinating their designer outfits for the day's festivities. Ethan had stumbled down to the kitchen in his pajamas, his hair sticking up at odd angles, somehow managing to look endearingly disheveled rather than slovenly. "Smells incredible, Mom," he said, wrapping our mother in a sleepy hug that made her beam with maternal satisfaction. "I missed your cooking." "You say that every time you come home," she replied, but her voice carried the warmth she reserved for her baby boy. As we gathered around the dining room table for breakfast, I found myself studying my family with the detached observation that had become my survival mechanism. My father sat quietly at the head of the table, reading sections of the newspaper between bites. Claire held court with stories from her law firm's holiday party, while Ethan interjected with commentary that made everyone laugh. My mother orchestrated it all, making sure everyone's plates stayed full while basking in the glow of her perfectly assembled family. I contributed when spoken to, laughed at the appropriate moments, and tried to ignore the growing tension in my chest as we approached the main event. When breakfast finally ended and we moved to the living room for gift exchange, my heart began racing in earnest. "Who wants to play Santa?" my mother asked, a tradition that usually fell to whoever was feeling most generous. This year, Ethan volunteered, settling cross-legged on the floor beside the tree with theatrical flair. "All right, let's see what we have here," he announced, rifling through the remaining packages. "Looks like we've got some serious options." The gifts were distributed with the usual fanfare. Claire received a set of designer luggage from our parents, perfect for her frequent business travel. Michael got a vintage watch that he admired extensively. Ethan unwrapped a high-end camera, supposedly to encourage his latest interest in photography, though we all knew it would likely join the graveyard of his abandoned hobbies. And then, finally, Ethan reached for my package. "This one's heavy," he said, lifting my carefully wrapped table with both hands. "For Mom, from Emily." My mother accepted the gift with polite curiosity, and I felt every nerve in my body come alive as she began unwrapping it. The brown paper fell away to reveal the rich walnut surface, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that I saw genuine surprise in her eyes. The coffee table sat between us, its carefully crafted details catching the light from the Christmas tree seemed to shift and dance depending on the angle. It was objectively a beautiful piece of furniture that showcased years of skill development and countless hours of meticulous work. The room fell silent as everyone took in the unexpected elegance of my gift. I held my breath, waiting for the appreciation I dreamed of, the recognition that would finally validate my chosen path. Instead, my mother's face cycled through a series of expressions I knew too well. Surprise, followed by assessment, followed by that particular brand of disappointment she'd perfected over the years. "Emily," she said carefully, running her hand over the smooth surface, "this is very nice, but honestly, dear, where would I put something like this?" The words hit me like cold water. I thought, maybe in the living room or the den. We already have a coffee table in the living room, and the den has that lovely set I got from Pottery Barn last year. Her voice carried the patient tone she used when explaining obvious things to slow children. "It's beautiful work, truly, but it's just not practical for our space." I felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time it cut deeper because I'd poured so much hope into this moment. "I could take measurements, help you rearrange?" "Emily, sweetheart," my mother interrupted gently, "I appreciate the thought, but we simply don't need another table. Our house is furnished exactly the way I like it." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Claire cleared her throat and offered a supportive smile that somehow made things worse. "It really is beautiful craftsmanship, Em. Maybe you could find a client who'd appreciate it." "But I made it for Mom," I said quietly, hearing the pathetic note in my own voice and hating it. "And it's lovely that you thought of me," my mother replied, her tone growing slightly firmer. "But I've always believed gifts should be useful, not just decorative. This feels more like clutter." The word hung in the air like a physical blow. Clutter. My months of work, my carefully honed skills, my desperate attempt at connection, reduced to clutter. "I understand," I managed, though I didn't understand anything about how the woman who kept every amateur photograph Ethan had ever taken could dismiss a piece of furniture that had been featured in design magazines as clutter. "You'll find the right home for it," she continued, already moving on to the next gift with the efficiency that characterized all her interactions with me. "Maybe that friend of yours, Natalie, might be interested. Didn't you say she just bought a new house?" The rest of the gift exchange passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite appreciation for other people's presents. I sat with my rejected table beside me, trying to figure out how to gracefully transport it back to my car without highlighting the awkwardness further. As the morning progressed and we moved on to preparing Christmas dinner, I found myself going through the motions of family tradition while nursing a wound that felt both fresh and ancient. This wasn't just about one gift being rejected, it was about a lifetime of feeling invisible, of having my efforts dismissed, of being categorized as the impractical dreamer who couldn't quite grasp what really mattered. Later, as I helped my mother in the kitchen, she attempted what I assumed was meant to be a comforting conversation. "You know I love you, Emily," she said while basting the turkey. "I just worry that you spend so much time on these projects when you could be focusing on building something more stable, something with benefits and security." "My business is stable, Mom. I have a waiting list of clients, and I know you think that, dear, but making furniture isn't exactly a career path. It's more of a hobby that's gotten out of hand." I stared at her, wondering how many times I'd tried to explain that my hobby paid my bills, funded my retirement account, and had earned recognition from design professionals across the country. But explaining felt pointless when the fundamental issue wasn't understanding, it was respect. "I should probably head home soon," I said. "Let me load my table back into the car." "Of course, sweetheart, and Emily, don't take this personally. I'm just being practical." As I carried my beautiful, rejected table back to my SUV, I felt the weight of it differently than I had that morning. What had felt like hope and possibility now felt like evidence of my fundamental misunderstanding of my place in this family. The drive home was quiet, except for the sound of my table shifting slightly in the back seat, a reminder of the gulf between the daughter I was and the daughter my mother wanted me to be. 4 days after Christmas, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. My studio, workshop located in a converted garage behind my small house, welcomed me back with the familiar smells of wood stain and sawdust. Here, surrounded by my tools and half-finished projects, I could almost forget the sting of my mother's rejection. I'd thrown myself into work with renewed intensity, starting a commissioned dining table for a client in Portland who'd seen my pieces featured in Northwest Design magazine. The magazine feature, something my family had barely acknowledged when I'd excitedly shared the news months ago, had resulted in a steady stream of inquiries from people who actually valued custom craftsmanship. My phone buzzed as I was marking measurements on a piece of maple. Natalie's name appeared on the screen, and I smiled, despite my lingering melancholy. My best friend and former college roommate had an uncanny ability to call exactly when I needed her most. "Hey, you," she said when I answered. "How are you holding up after the Hart family Christmas experience?" "Surviving," I replied, setting down my pencil. "Back to work, which helps." "Good. Listen, I have some news that might cheer you up. Remember that coffee table you mentioned, the one your mom said she couldn't use?" My stomach tightened. I'd told Natalie about the Christmas disaster in a phone call full of tears and frustration. "What about it?" "Well, you're not going to believe this, but I was driving past your parents' neighborhood this morning on my way to that client meeting, and I saw the most interesting thing." Something in her voice made my chest constrict. "Natalie, what did you see?" "Your mother is having a yard sale, and Emily, your table is sitting right there on the front lawn with a price tag of $25. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she just told me. "Emily? Are you there?" "She's selling it?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I'm so sorry, hun. I almost didn't tell you, but I thought you should know. Mrs. Green from next door was looking at it when I drove by. She seemed interested." Mrs. Green, the neighbor who'd watched me grow up, who'd always been kind but never particularly close to our family. The idea of her buying my rejected gift for pocket change felt surreal and humiliating in equal measure. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "Emily, wait." But I was already grabbing my keys, my mind spinning with a mixture of hurt, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. The drive to my parents' house passed in a blur of residential streets and traffic lights that seemed determined to slow my progress. When I turned onto Maple Avenue, I could see the signs of the yard sale from 2 blocks away. Folding tables laden with household items dotted the front lawn, and several neighbors browsed through my mother's cast-offs with a focused attention of serious bargain hunters. And there, positioned prominently near the sidewalk where everyone could see it, was my coffee table. A bright yellow sticker proclaimed its worth $25. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the scene. My mother moved between customers with practiced efficiency, chatting pleasantly about the history of various items and negotiating prices with the skill of someone who'd hosted many such sales over the years. Mrs. Green was indeed examining my table, running her hands over the surface with obvious appreciation. I watched her bend down to check the underside, a gesture that suggested she understood quality construction when she saw it. The smart thing would have been to drive away, to preserve what remained of my dignity and deal with this humiliation privately. Instead, I found myself getting out of the car and walking across the street with purposeful strides. "Emily!" My mother looked up with genuine surprise as I approached. "What a nice surprise! I didn't expect to see you today." "I can see that," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I gestured towards the table where Mrs. Green was still examining the craftsmanship. "Cleaning house?" "Oh, that. Well, yes, I mentioned to Mrs. Patterson that I had some items I wasn't using, and she suggested a yard sale might be fun. You know how these things go. One person's clutter is another person's treasure." There was that word again. Clutter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Mrs. Green looked up at my approach, her weathered face brightening with recognition. "Emily Hart, as I live and breathe! Is this your beautiful work?" She gestured toward the table. "Your mother mentioned you made it." "She did?" I glanced at my mother, who was suddenly very interested in rearranging items on a nearby table. "Oh yes, she's been telling everyone who stops to look at it. Such incredible craftsmanship. The joinery alone must have taken hours." Mrs. Green's appreciation was genuine and knowledgeable. "I've been admiring it for 20 minutes, but I have to say, the price seems far too low for work of this quality." "The price is what it is," my mother interjected quickly. "We're just looking to find good homes for things we can't use." I stared at her, feeling something shift inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. 4 days. It had taken her exactly 4 days to go from rejecting my gift as unnecessary clutter to putting it up for sale at a price that wouldn't cover the cost of materials. "Mrs. Green," I said carefully, "if you're interested in the table, I'd be happy to discuss a fair price with you directly. This piece is worth considerably more than $25. My mother's eyes widened. "Emily, that's not—" "Actually," Mrs. Green interrupted, "I was hoping you might say that. I've been following your work ever since that magazine article, and I'd love to commission a matching side table if you're interested. Would it be possible to discuss this privately?" The magazine article. The one my family had barely acknowledged, but which had been noticed by neighbors and strangers who actually understood the value of custom craftsmanship. "I'd be delighted," I said, pulling a business card from my wallet. "Let me load this in my car, and we can talk." As Mrs. Green and I carefully lifted my table, I felt my mother's eyes on us. The weight distribution that had seemed awkward during my Christmas morning retreat now felt like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. "Emily," my mother called as we maneuvered the table toward my SUV, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I paused in my loading, straightening to look at her directly. Around us, other yard sale shoppers continued their browsing, but I felt like we were suspended in a bubble of tension that had been building for 29 years. "No misunderstanding, Mom. I understand perfectly." The drive home felt different this time. My table was back where it belonged, and Mrs. Green's genuine appreciation
echoed in my mind like an antidote to my mother's dismissal. More importantly, something had shifted in my understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about one gift or one moment of rejection. This was about a pattern of dismissal that had shaped my entire relationship with my family. And for the first time in my life, I was beginning to see it clearly enough to do something about it. Back in my workshop, as I helped Mrs. Green examine the table in proper lighting, I made a proposition that surprised even me. Well, I hope you understand that Marina has obligations now, social expectations that may not align with your lifestyle. I smiled back, just as sharp. I understand that Marina is lucky to have people who love her exactly as she is. That's actually pretty rare in some circles. Before she could respond, Marina appeared at my side, having clearly overheard the exchange. "Mrs. Carlyle," she said pleasantly, "I was just telling the mayor's wife about Lima's work. Did you know she's having a solo show at the Riverside Gallery next month? I'm so proud of her success." Abigail's smile faltered slightly. How lovely. Isn't it? I was thinking we should host a small gathering to celebrate. Nothing too fancy, just family and real friends. The emphasis on real wasn't lost on anyone. Abigail excused herself with icy politeness, and Marina turned to me with a grin that reminded me of the sister I'd grown up with. "That felt good," she admitted. "It looked good on you." Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marina found me on the garden terrace where I was getting some air. "So," she said, joining me at the stone railing, "what happens now? Now you go on your honeymoon and figure out how to be married while staying yourself. And us?" I considered this. The hurt from the past year wouldn't disappear overnight, but sitting here with my sister, seeing her fight for herself and for us, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. "We rebuild," I said finally, slowly, honestly, no more pretending to be people we're not. She nodded, then pulled something from her bouquet, a small white rose she'd apparently saved. "I know it's traditional for the bride to throw the whole bouquet, but I wanted you to have this, not because of what it's supposed to mean about marriage or anything, but because," she struggled for words, "because you saved me today. Not just from a bad wedding, but from losing myself completely." I took the rose, its petals soft between my fingers. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were. Promise me something?" "What?" "Promise me we won't let anyone else's expectations come between us again. Whatever happens with Ethan's family, whatever pressure comes, we stick together." "I promise." As I drove home that night, the rose carefully placed in a cup of water on my passenger seat, I thought about victory and what it really meant. I'd thought winning would feel like vindication, like proving I was right about Marina's choices. Instead, it felt like getting my sister back. My phone buzzed with a text from Marina. "Thank you for being the sister I needed, not the one I deserved." I smiled and typed back, "See you for coffee next week. We have a lot to catch up on." The highway stretched out ahead of me, dark except for my headlights and the occasional passing car. In the distance, I could see the lights of home, where Jonah was probably waiting with ice cream and the desire to hear every detail of the day. I'd gone to that wedding expecting nothing and hoping for very little. Instead, I'd found something I thought was lost forever. My sister. Not the polished version she'd tried to become, but the real Marina who'd stayed up all night helping me with art projects and defended me when kids at school called my paintings weird. Sometimes the best victories aren't about defeating someone else, but about refusing to let them defeat you. Today, Marina and I had both won something much more valuable than any argument. We'd won each other back. The rose beside me caught the light from a passing street lamp, and I pressed down a little harder on the accelerator, eager to get home and start this new chapter of being sisters again.
What's wrong? It's complicated.
My biggest client, the Morrison Group, they're having their annual board retreat next month, and they wanted something special for their new conference center. I may have oversold your availability. I set down my clipboard, focusing entirely on the conversation. What exactly did you oversell? A complete conference room set. Table for 12, matching sideboard, maybe some accent pieces. They saw the design and architecture feature and specifically requested Heart and Home. She paused. Emily, this could be a $50,000 commission, but they need it in 6 weeks. 6 weeks for a complete conference room set. It was an impossible timeline for the kind of quality work I was known for, and Claire had to know that. Claire, a dining table alone takes 8 weeks minimum. That's with no other projects. I know. But Emily, this isn't just about money. Morrison Group has connections throughout the corporate world. If they're happy with your work, it could transform your business. And if they're unhappy because I rushed the work and compromised quality, it could destroy my reputation. You're the most talented woodworker I know. If anyone can make this work, it's you. The compliment caught me off guard. In 32 years, I couldn't remember Claire ever praising my skills so directly. Part of me wanted to bask in her recognition, but the practical part of my brain was already calculating what 6 weeks of 18-hour days would cost me, both financially and personally. Why did you promise something without checking with me first? A long pause. Because I wanted to help. Because I've watched you build something incredible, and I thought this could be your big break. Claire, I've already had my big break. I built it myself, one client at a time. I know, and I'm proud of you for that. More proud than I've probably shown. Her voice softened. Look, I screwed up. I got excited about the opportunity and spoke before thinking. But Emily, the Morrison Group isn't going away. They'll wait if you need more time. I walked to the showroom window, looking out at the arts district coming alive with Friday night energy. A year ago, this conversation would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and people-pleasing. Tonight, I felt something different. The clarity that comes from knowing your own worth. I'll talk to them, I said finally. But I'm not promising anything I can't deliver properly. The meeting with Morrison Group's facilities director happened the following Monday. Janet Morrison was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of direct manner I'd learned to appreciate in clients who knew what they wanted. Ms. Hart, your work is exactly what we're looking for. Quality craftsmanship that makes a statement about our values. She gestured toward the portfolio I'd brought. The question is timeline. We have our retreat scheduled for the second week of June. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate the opportunity, but I need to be honest about what's realistic. A conference table for 12, properly constructed, requires 10 to 12 weeks. That's not padding. That's the time needed for wood selection, drying, joinery, finishing, and quality control. She nodded thoughtfully. What if we adjusted the scope? Perhaps a smaller table for now, with the understanding that we'd commission additional pieces for future projects. That I could work with. An 8-person table with matching chairs could be completed in 6 weeks if I cleared my schedule, but it would be a significant commitment on my part. What kind of commitment are we talking about? I'd need to postpone 3 other commissions, which means disappointing existing clients. I'd also need to bring in additional help, which increases costs. I looked at her directly. If I do this, Mrs. Morrison, I need to know you're genuinely committed to working with Heart and Home long term, not just solving an immediate problem. I appreciate your candor. Let me be equally direct. Morrison Group has 12 conference rooms across our facilities, and we're renovating our executive offices next year. If your work meets our standards, we're looking at a multi-year relationship. The numbers were compelling, but something else decided me. Janet Morrison's respect for my expertise. She wasn't trying to pressure me into an impossible situation. She was asking what was actually achievable and adjusting her expectations accordingly. All right, Mrs. Morrison,
let's talk specifics.
The next 6 weeks tested every skill I'd developed as both a craftsperson and a business owner. I brought in 2 additional woodworkers I'd collaborated with before, plus Marcus for the custom hardware. Helen coordinated the project like a general managing a military campaign, keeping everyone on schedule while handling our regular clients. The work was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. I was pushing my technical abilities in new directions, experimenting with joinery techniques I'd only read about, creating pieces that would showcase Heart and Home's capabilities to a completely new market. But the pressure also revealed cracks in my family relationships that success hadn't entirely healed. My mother visited the workshop during the second week of the project, ostensibly to see how things were progressing. What she found was organized chaos, wood shavings covering every surface, multiple pieces in various stages of completion, and me looking like I hadn't slept in days. "Emily, this seems overwhelming," she said, watching me hand sand a table leg for the 3rd time. "Are you sure you haven't taken on more than you can handle?" "I'm sure." I didn't look up from my work. "This is what success looks like, Mom. Sometimes it's messy." "I just worry that you're pushing yourself too hard. What if something goes wrong? What if the client isn't satisfied?" There it was, the familiar undertone of doubt, the assumption that I was in over my head, the subtle suggestion that maybe I should have stuck to smaller, safer projects. "Then I'll handle it," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "That's what professionals do." She stood there for another moment, clearly wanting to say more, then left without offering to help or expressing confidence in my abilities. The interaction left me feeling hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Helen found me taking a break on the workshop steps an hour later, staring at my hands and wondering why my mother's doubts still had the power to affect me. "Rough visit?" she asked, settling beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "Rough visit. She thinks I'm going to fail." Does she? Or does she think if you succeed at something this big, she'll have to completely reevaluate everything she's believed about your choices? I looked at Helen, struck by the insight. "You think she wants me to fail?" "I think she's scared of what your success means about her judgment. It's easier to maintain that you're impractical than to admit she's been wrong about something fundamental." That's a depressing way to look at it. It's also liberating. Her opinion isn't about you, Emily. It's about her own discomfort with being wrong. The conversation helped me refocus on what mattered, delivering exceptional work for a client who valued craftsmanship. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the project with renewed energy, determined to create pieces that would speak for themselves regardless of who doubted my abilities. The conference set came together beautifully. The table was a masterpiece of walnut and cherry, with subtle inlay work that caught the light without being ostentatious. The chairs combined comfort with elegance, each one individually fitted to ensure perfect consistency. Morrison's hardware was flawless, complementing the wood tones while adding contemporary touches that kept the pieces from feeling traditional. But the pressure also revealed cracks in my family relationships that success hadn't entirely healed. Morrison's Group's conference center was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, state-of-the-art technology, and an atmosphere that spoke of serious business decisions. As my team carefully positioned each piece, I watched Janet Morrison's face for her reaction. "Ms. Hart, this exceeds every expectation we had. The craftsmanship is extraordinary." Relief and pride flooded through me in equal measure. "Thank you. I'm glad it meets your needs." "More than meets them. I'd like to schedule a meeting next week to discuss those additional conference rooms we mentioned." As my team finished the installation, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. This project had pushed me beyond my comfort zone in every way, and I delivered work that met the highest professional standards. More importantly, I'd done it by trusting my own expertise rather than seeking approval from people who'd never understood what I was building. The irony wasn't lost on me that Claire's overpromising had led to this breakthrough. Sometimes the best opportunities came disguised as impossible challenges. The Business Journal feature appeared 3 weeks after the Morrison Group installation. Local artisan bridges traditional craftsmanship and corporate design, read the headline, accompanied by photographs of my work in Morrison's conference center and a flattering portrait of me in my workshop. The article was everything I could have hoped for: professional, detailed, and focused on the quality and innovation of my work rather than treating custom furniture as a quaint hobby. The reporter had clearly done her research, interviewing Janet Morrison, Helen, and even Marcus about our collaborative approach. But it was the sidebar that changed everything. From rejection to recognition, how a Christmas gift became a business foundation. The reporter had somehow learned about my coffee table's journey from Christmas morning dismissal to showroom centerpiece, weaving it into a narrative about perseverance and family dynamics that hit closer to home than I'd expected. The article quoted Helen extensively. Emily created that table as an expression of love for her family. But when it wasn't appreciated in that context, she found people who could recognize its true value. Sometimes the most meaningful gifts aren't the ones that are immediately accepted. My phone started ringing before I'd finished reading the piece. Clients, potential clients, other artisans wanting to collaborate. But it was Natalie's call that mattered most. Emily, have you seen the Journal website? Your article is the most shared story this week. People are calling you an inspiration. I know, it's overwhelming. Is your family proud? I paused, considering the question. Claire had called to congratulate me, genuinely excited about the professional recognition. Ethan had posted the article on social media with effusive praise for his incredibly talented sister. My father had left a voicemail saying he was proud of what I'd accomplished and sorry it had taken him so long to understand the scope of my work. But my mother hadn't called. Most of them, yes. That evening, as I was locking up the showroom, I saw my mother's car pull up outside. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes before finally getting out and approaching the door. The article, she said without preamble when I let her in. I read it. I figured you would. She walked directly to my coffee table, now famous as the centerpiece that had launched Heart and Home. In the magazine photographs, it looked exactly like what it was, a museum-quality piece that belonged in the finest homes. $25, she said quietly. Mom! She turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. Emily, I need to apologize. Not just for the yard sale, but for years of not seeing what you were building. The words I'd waited 30 decades to hear were finally coming, but they felt different than I had imagined. Smaller somehow, and less important than they once seemed. I thought I was being practical, she continued. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment by encouraging more traditional paths. But I was protecting myself from having to admit I didn't understand what you were capable of. Mom, you don't have to... Yes, I do. Helen was right when she told that reporter that the most meaningful gifts aren't always immediately accepted. You gave me something beautiful, and I treated it like clutter because I couldn't see past my own limitations. I looked around the showroom, at the careful displays, the successful business, the life I'd built from determination and skill. Then I looked at my mother, finally seeing me clearly after all these years. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. But Mom, I need you to understand something. I don't need your approval anymore. I needed it for a long time, and not having it hurt more than I can explain. But I've learned to value my own work, and that's what matters now. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. And I'm proud of that too. You became who you were meant to be despite me, not because of me. Maybe because of the challenge you presented gently. Maybe I needed to learn that my worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition. We stood there in my showroom, surrounded by pieces that told the story of my journey from overlooked daughter to successful artisan. The coffee table sat between us, no longer a symbol of rejection, but a reminder that the most beautiful things often emerge from difficult circumstances. Would you like me to make you something, I asked? A piece that actually fits your home and your life? She smiled through her tears. I'd like that very much. But Emily, I'm keeping that coffee table quote from the article, the one about meaningful gifts not being immediately accepted. I think I need to remember that. As she left that night, I realized that forgiveness and understanding were different things. I could forgive my mother for not seeing my worth, just as she was finally able to see and acknowledge what she'd missed, but the deeper understanding, that my value had never depended on her recognition, that was something I'd had to learn on my own. The little girl who'd craved her mother's approval was finally at peace, not because she'd received it, but because she'd learned to live without needing it. And that, I thought, as I turned off the showroom lights, was the most meaningful gift of all. 6 months after the Business Journal article changed everything, I stood in the expanded Heart and Home showroom, watching the controlled chaos of our first annual craft showcase. We'd grown from a single warehouse space to 3 connected units, each showcasing different aspects of what Helen now called the Heart and Home experience. The main showroom still featured my furniture as the anchor, but we'd added Marcus's metalwork studio, a ceramic section run by Sophia Chen, Mrs. Chen's niece, as it turned out, and the textile corner where local weavers displayed their work. The transformation had been gradual but purposeful. After the Morrison Group's success led to a string of corporate commissions, I'd faced a choice: scale up to meet demand and risk losing the personal touch that made our work special, or stay small and turn away business. Helen, with her retail wisdom, had suggested a third option. Why not create a destination for people who value handcrafted work? Not just furniture, but a whole lifestyle approach. Show people what it means to live with things that are made with intention. The showcase was the culmination of that vision. Potential clients wandered through displays that showed how custom pieces could transform living spaces, while established customers brought friends to share their discoveries. Local food vendors offered tastings and a jazz quartet played in the corner, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a celebration than a sales event. I moved through the crowd, checking on my collaborators and greeting clients both old and new. The energy was intoxicating. People genuinely excited about craftsmanship, willing to invest in pieces that would last generations, rather than following trends that would be outdated in 5 years. Emily! Janet Morrison appeared at my elbow, her silver hair gleaming under the gallery lights. I wanted you to meet someone. This is David Chin, CEO of Pacific Northwest Bank. I shook hands with a distinguished man in his 60s who was examining my latest piece, a conference table even more ambitious than the Morrison Commission, featuring an intricate pattern of 5 different wood species that created a flowing river effect across the surface. Miss Hart, Mrs. Morrison has been singing your praises for months. We're renovating our headquarters next year, and I'm told you're the person who can create something truly special for our boardroom. I'd be honored to discuss it. Then I caught sight of a familiar figure near the entrance. Please excuse me for just a moment. My mother stood just inside the doorway, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of what she was seeing. She'd visited the showroom several times since our reconciliation, but always during quiet hours when she could examine my work without distraction. Tonight, surrounded by dozens of people celebrating craftsmanship and paying genuine money for custom pieces, she seemed to be seeing Heart and Home's success from an entirely new perspective. I made my way over to her, noting how she kept glancing around with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, I'm so glad you came. Emily, I had no idea it had grown so much. She gestured toward the crowd, the multiple rooms, the obvious prosperity of what we'd built. When you said you were having a showcase, I pictured something smaller. It started smaller. Everything did. I followed her gaze to where Helen was holding court near my coffee table, now permanently displayed with a small plaque explaining its significance as Heart and Home's founding piece. Mrs. Patterson called this morning. She said half the neighborhood was planning to attend. My mother's voice carried a note of wonder. She said you've become quite famous in certain circles. Before I could respond, Claire appeared beside us, elegant as always, but with an enthusiasm that had become more genuine over the past months.
Mom, isn't this incredible? I've been bringing all my colleagues by to see Emily's work. The Morrison piece alone has generated 6 referrals. She gestured toward the far wall, where photographs from my corporate installations were displayed. Emily's become the go-to person for executive-level custom work. The go-to person, my mother repeated slowly. More than that, Ethan added, materializing with a plate of appetizers and his trademark grin. Emily's work is being featured in design magazines across the country. Did you see the spread in Architectural Digest? 6 pages of her pieces in that tech executive's house in Portland. I watched my mother take in this information, seeing her mentally recalibrate everything she thought she knew about my little furniture hobby. The disconnect between her longtime assumptions and the reality surrounding us was almost comical, except for the genuine confusion in her eyes. "Emily," she said quietly, "can we talk privately for a moment?" I led her to my workshop space, recently converted into a demonstration area where visitors could watch artisans at work. At this hour, it was empty, except for the scent of wood shavings and the familiar tools that had shaped my journey. "I need to ask you something, and I want a honest answer," she began, settling onto a stool beside my workbench. "How long have you been this successful? Really successful, not just getting by?" I considered the question, understanding that she was asking about more than just timeline. Financially, I've been profitable for about 4 years. Recognition-wise, the Business Journal article was the turning point, but it built on years of smaller successes. 4 years. She was quiet for a moment. "Emily, for 4 years, I've been worrying about your stability and suggesting you find something more practical. For 4 years, I've been treating your business like a phase you hadn't outgrown yet. I know. But you never corrected me. You never said, 'Mom, I'm actually doing quite well, thank you.' You just let me worry." I leaned against the workbench, choosing my words carefully. "For a long time, I was still trying to prove myself to you. I thought if I worked hard enough, created beautiful enough pieces, eventually you'd see what I was building and be proud." I gestured toward the sounds of celebration filtering in from the showroom. "But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need your pride to validate my choices. I needed to be proud of my own work." "So you stopped trying to convince me?" "I stopped needing to convince you." The distinction felt important. "Mom, I love you, and I wanted your approval for most of my life. But I couldn't keep making my decisions based on what would make you comfortable with my choices." "You know," she nodded slowly, her eyes taking in the workshop that had become the heart of a thriving business. "Your father keeps telling me how proud he is of you, how impressed he is with what you've built. Dad's been great. He's really tried to understand what I do. And I haven't. It wasn't a question. I've been so focused on my idea of what success should look like that I missed what your success actually looked like." Before I could respond, Helen appeared in the doorway with an apologetic expression. "Emily, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the photographer from Northwest Living is here for the feature shoot. She'd like to get some photos while the showcase is still active." "Of course, I'll be right there." I turned back to my mother. "Mom, why don't you stay and watch? See how all this actually works." The next hour provided my mother with a masterclass in contemporary artisan business. She watched me navigate interviews with journalists, discuss technical details with potential clients, and coordinate with my collaborators to present a unified vision of what Heart and Home represented. Most importantly, she saw how people responded to my work. Not polite interest or charitable support, but genuine excitement about investing in pieces that would become family heirlooms. She watched a young couple commission their first major furniture purchase, a dining table to celebrate buying their first house. She listened to an established collector explain to his friend why Emily Hart pieces were worth the investment. As the evening wound down and the last visitors filtered out, my family lingered to help with cleanup. It felt natural and right. the four of us working together to restore order to the space that had showcased everything I'd built. Emily, my father said as we stacked chairs, I owe you an apology too. Dad, you've been wonderful.
I've been passive. For years, I let your mother voice doubts I didn't share because it was easier than challenging her perspective. He looked directly at me. I should have defended your choices more actively. I should have made sure you knew that at least one of your parents understood what you were creating. It's okay, Dad, really. No, it's not okay. But it's past, and what matters now is that we all see clearly. He gestured around the showroom. This is extraordinary, Emily. Not just the business success, but the way you've created something that brings people joy. That's a rare gift. As we finished cleaning up, I found myself standing once again beside my coffee table, the piece that had started everything. The plaque Helen had commissioned told its story simply. This table was handcrafted by Emily Hart as a Christmas gift in 2023. Initially rejected as impractical, it became the foundation piece for Heart and Home custom furniture. Sometimes the most meaningful gifts require time to be fully appreciated. My mother appeared beside me, reading the plaque for what was probably the 20th time since she'd first discovered it. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about not needing my approval anymore. Mom, I didn't mean... No, you were right, and I'm glad you learned to value your own work, because clearly you understand its worth better than I did. She paused. But Emily, I hope that not needing my approval doesn't mean you don't want it, because you have it now, completely and wholeheartedly. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were different from the tears I'd shed over family disappointments in the past. These were tears of completion, of a circle finally closing. I do want it, Mom. I always did. I just had to learn that wanting it and needing it are different things. Well, you have it. And more than that, I have your respect for building something remarkable despite my lack of understanding. As we prepared to leave, Helen appeared with a bottle of champagne and a knowing smile. I thought we should toast, she announced, producing glasses from seemingly nowhere. To Heart and Home, to beautiful craftsmanship, and to families who learn to see each other clearly. We raised our glasses in the quiet showroom, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built. But the real victory wasn't the business success or the professional recognition, though those certainly mattered. The real victory was standing there with my family, no longer desperate for their approval, but genuinely happy to have their understanding and support. To Emily, my mother said quietly, who taught us all the difference between practical and meaningful. To all of us, I corrected, for learning that it's never too late to see each other clearly. As we turned off the lights and locked up the showroom, I felt the satisfying weight of a story that had finally reached its proper ending, not with dramatic reconciliation or tearful apologies, but with the quiet recognition that people can change, relationships can heal, and sometimes the most rejected gifts become the foundation for everything beautiful that follows. 3 weeks later, I received a call that would have once sent me into a spiral of anxiety, but now simply made me smile. My mother's voice came through the phone with the careful tone she used when she was trying to be thoughtful. Emily, dear, I have a request. Your father and I have been talking, and we'd like to commission a piece from you. Of course, Mom. What did you have in mind? Well, that's the thing. We want you to choose. We want you to create something that represents what Heart and Home means to you. Something that will remind us of this whole journey we've been on together. I set down the chisel I'd been using on a new project, giving her my full attention. Mom, are you sure? You know, my work isn't exactly practical for most traditional homes. She laughed, a sound that carried more warmth than I'd heard from her in years. Emily, I think I've learned that beautiful things don't have to be practical to be valuable. They just have to be meaningful. The commission became a meditation on transformation.
I designed a writing desk that combined elements from every phase of my journey: walnut from the original coffee table, cherry wood representing growth, and maple accents symbolizing new beginnings. The piece featured hidden compartments and subtle details that would reveal themselves over time, much like the relationship my family and I had finally learned to appreciate. The day I delivered it, 6 weeks later, felt different from any family gathering I could remember. Instead of the familiar tension and unspoken disappointments, there was genuine curiosity
About my process, thoughtful questions about the wood choices, and honest admiration for the craftsmanship. Emily, my father said, running his hand along the smooth desktop surface, this is going to sit in our living room for the rest of our lives. Every time I look at it, I'll remember not just your skill, but the courage it took to build something beautiful despite our doubts. And every time I see it, my mother added, I'll remember that sometimes the most important gifts are the ones that challenge us to see differently. Claire had brought her family to witness the delivery, and I watched my 8-year-old nephew, Jake, explore the desk's hidden compartments with the kind of wonder that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with woodworking in the first place. "Aunt Emily," he said, discovering a secret drawer behind what appeared to be a solid panel, "how did you make this magic happen?" Years of practice and learning that the most beautiful things usually have hidden depths you can only find if you take time to really look. He nodded solemnly, as if this were the most important information he'd ever received, then returned to his exploration with renewed determination. Later that evening, after the family celebration had wound down and everyone had gone home, I found myself back at Heart and Home, working late on a new commission. The showroom was quiet except for the gentle sounds of Marcus finishing a metalwork project in his studio and the distant hum of traffic from the street outside. Helen appeared with 2 cups of tea, settling into the chair beside my workbench with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd become both business partner and trusted friend. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Delivering that desk to your parents?" "Complete," I said after a moment's consideration. Like closing a circle that had been open for too long. And now, I looked around the workshop that had become the center of my universe, at the tools that felt like extensions of my hands, at the half-finished pieces that represented challenges yet to be solved, and at the business we'd built from determination and mutual respect. Now I think about the future, about the young artisans who might want to learn traditional techniques, about the pieces I haven't created yet, about building something that will outlast both of us. Helen smiled. "Speaking of the future, I had an interesting call today. The Portland Museum of Art wants to discuss an exhibition featuring contemporary furniture makers. They specifically mention your work as an example of traditional craftsmanship adapted for modern living. A museum exhibition? Complete with artist talks, demonstrations, and a catalog featuring your pieces alongside established masters?" She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Emily, they're talking about you in the same conversation as people who've been doing this for 40 years. The news should have felt like validation, but instead it felt like confirmation of something I already knew, that the work itself was the reward, and everything else was simply evidence that others were beginning to understand what I'd always known about the value of creating beautiful, lasting things." "What do you think?" Helen asked. "I think that little girl who wanted her mother's approval would have been thrilled by museum recognition. But the woman I've become is more excited about the apprentice program we're starting next month." "The apprentice program?" "I've been thinking about it for weeks. There are young people out there who want to learn traditional woodworking, but can't afford formal training. What if Heart and Home became a place where experienced artisans could pass on their knowledge?" Helen's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm I'd learned to trust completely. A teaching studio alongside the showroom, workshops for beginners, advanced classes for serious students, maybe even partnerships with local schools. Exactly. We could document traditional techniques, create resources for future craftspeople, build something that matters beyond just selling beautiful furniture. We spent the next hour sketching possibilities. Our conversation flowed between practical considerations and ambitious dreams. It felt like the natural evolution of everything we'd built.
Not just a business, but a community centered around the belief that handmade things carried value that couldn't be mass-produced. As I finally prepared to head home that night, I paused for one last look at my original coffee table, still holding its place of honor in the main showroom. The plaque Helen had commissioned told its story in simple terms, but I knew the real story was more complex and more beautiful than any brief explanation could capture. The table represented more than rejection and redemption. It represented the journey from seeking external validation to trusting internal worth. It represented the transformation of a family's understanding and the evolution of a daughter's relationship with her own gifts. Most importantly, it represented the truth that the most meaningful creations often emerge from the most challenging circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thank you for the beautiful desk. Every time I sit down to write, I'll remember that you never stopped believing in your own gifts, even when we couldn't see them clearly. I'm proud of who you've become, but I'm prouder of who you always were. Love, Mom." I smiled, saving the message before tucking my phone away. The street was quiet as I locked up Heart and Home and walked toward my car. But the arts district around me hummed with the creative energy of people pursuing their passions in studios and galleries throughout the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The museum exhibition to consider, the apprentice program to develop, the commission pieces that would test my skills in new directions. But tonight, I carried with me the deep satisfaction of knowing I'd built something lasting. Not just a business or a reputation, but a life that honored both my talents and my values. The perfect gift, I realized, as I drove through the quiet streets toward home, hadn't been the coffee table that started this journey. The perfect gift had been learning to value my own work enough to share it with people who could appreciate its true worth. Everything else, the success, the recognition, my family's eventual understanding, and now the opportunity to teach others, was simply the natural result of that fundamental act of self-respect. And as I pulled into my driveway, past the workshop where it all began, I felt the quiet contentment that comes from knowing you've found your place in the world, not by conforming to others' expectations, but by having the courage to define success on your own terms. That was a gift no one could ever reject, undervalue, or price at $25 again. And tomorrow, I would start teaching others how to create their own version of that same priceless gift. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.